Welcome back. Another person has pulled me out of my podcasting retirement, more so because we recorded an episode that was deemed not acceptable. So I've convinced John to go on. One of my online sparring partners that I've met on the internet, as a term I know you like as well, never to be called Jonathan Corey, the CEO. And I always mess up Precursive. I always say percussion because that's an old man software thing.
We just tried to come up with a name that people would really struggle to.
Yeah, that's great. It's great. Just so we know the realm of what you're talking about here. What do you guys do over there?
So we're a software company. We're a partner actually of Salesforce.com. So our app is built on the Force.com platform, and it's used by typically mid-market and enterprise software and services teams to manage all elements of services delivery. So professional services delivery, services sales, implementations, all of that good stuff.
We're both on the same side of things, but we have slightly different lenses of things. And I love reading your opinions. What you say as it blends services for SaaS, which can be a dirty word, at least I find in the startup world. And I'm always like, go look at what Salesforce is doing. It works for them. I know you've got some market trends that you're always researching. Give people a little landscape, and people that might be listening to this, maybe they're at like a $5 to $10 million software company and they're being told like, no, we shouldn't do services. And if we do that, it's only via partners. We are a SaaS company.
Yeah. Actually, one of the things that I read was that the top 50 software businesses by revenue, what's the one commonality they all have? Services revenue streams. So many of them often do also have a partner ecosystem. Salesforce, Amazon, many of these companies do. It's like this romance and reality of services, the way that I would frame it. To a certain extent, people are a little bit unsure about it because it is a business within a business. And that's key. If you're running a services organization, it's very similar actually to running a sales organization.
Absolutely. I always felt like I was on my own island. Don't break any plates or glasses and everything will be good.
Definitely. The reason why they're very similar is you have to have a go-to-market. You're scaling a team that becomes potentially quite a large team. If you're in the sort of stage that you described, like 5 to 10 million, depending on what type of thing that you sell, you might have 3 people doing implementations. You could have 20. And so you very quickly become one of the people in the business that's got one of the largest teams.
Yeah.
But that also means that you have a line on the P&L and you have a cost line on the P&L.
Right.
And you may not be profitable, which then becomes pretty clear pretty quickly in the roles. It's not an easy world to figure out.
I remember when we went public at Bright Cove, CFO pulled me aside and said, just to let you know, one of our statements is going to be that our professional services team will be profitable for the first quarter that we're live. And I'm like, that's great. So I need this.
Exactly. That's definitely one of the big trends. I don't come from software at all. When I got involved in this business, I wasn't selling technology. I wasn't in technology. It's the first time I worked in SaaS. So I had to do a huge amount of learning myself. I came from professional services.
Yeah.
So I worked for a company called CEB. They wrote the Challenger sale research. Okay. So I worked selling subscription services, which was into Fortune 500 FTSE type companies. And then I sold consultancy services and saw the problem there that our software solves. And again, was very earnest in trying to figure out what happened after I sold stuff, because the thing that I was selling was typically large scale transformation. And therefore there was add-on work or additional work that was going on. So I was just interested in that post-sale world. The reason why service is rising much more to the top now, CS is having that crisis of faith moment, as it were, whereas services is becoming much more important to many businesses because people have actually figured out, holy cow, this is the first step in the customer journey, probably the most important step in the customer journey, but also we can see that we need this to unlock additional revenue opportunities or cross-sell opportunities or upsell opportunities if we sell multiple products to our customers, and services just has such an outsized impact on that.
Just as a side note, when I look at CS and the way you described PS being like a sales organization, I'm always like, why can't you guys just adopt that? It's revenue, it's renewals, it's monetary. You've got a big team. What comes up after that? It's the whole relationship and commercials.
There was this period that I've lived through in my career in SaaS, growth at all costs to responsible growth.
Yep.
Now, we as a business have an investor, and my first pitch to that investor, in my first pitch to them, I said, look, I believe in responsible growth. They are a private equity fund. That's something that they want to hear, but it's also something that you need to deliver is knowing how to live within your means. One of the reasons why implementations and services are so important is the Silicon Valley proverb, leaky buckets don't float. And one of the main reasons for churn is onboarding, implementations going wrong, because you're still going to have product market fit issues that you're dealing with as a business. You might have mis-selling, or someone's bought something earnestly that they thought was a thing, but actually turns out not to be. So that's all still going to happen to you.
Right.
You've still got stakeholder changes. You've got M&A that might disrupt your relationship. So you've got all of these things that are environmental factors that could impact your retention rates, your GRR, your NRR.
Yep.
And then you've got this one controllable, which is with the good fit customers or the people that you've worked really hard to acquire. You've got to make that implementation successful.
As a smart man once said, retention starts in implementation.
And the thing is, it's really fucking hard. Sorry, you can swear on the show.
I get to put that E, that makes it look like an NWA album. So absolutely.
It is really hard because you are running a business within a business. You go through these different stages of maturity. You have to have a methodology. The examples that I would give in sales, you've got a sales process, which is the steps you go through with a customer. So I don't like the term discovery, but everyone has it in the industry. So
I don't like it, but then everybody knows what that is, right?
Everyone knows what that means. I prefer diagnosis.
Diagnostic sounds very fancy and almost British.
You should know your customers' problems before you go in the room with them. In sales, you have the process that you go through, and the buyer is going to also have their process. Even buying today, there are so many commonalities now. If I look at buying cycles, because they're doing them with their clients and therefore they adopt it with vendors. But then a process without a methodology in and around that means that translates over into services and implementation, which is you can have a project plan in your customer onboarding tool or your PSA. Yep. You can have these project plans, doesn't matter or if you're using spreadsheets. That's not a methodology. That's not how that engagement's going to be managed. It's not coaching.
I keep saying that. It's a project plan. It's the middle of the sandwich.
Exactly. We've had this challenge ourselves internally. I'm not going to say that we're perfect, but we've put so much time and effort over the last 18 months because we've jumped several levels. We've gone from dealing with smaller projects to dealing with much, much bigger projects and transformation programs.
Yep.
Direct with partners, with multiple technology vendors in. We were good at project management. We were good technically, but we had a lot to learn in terms of an engagement methodology and being prescriptive and stakeholder management and all of this type of stuff. And this, again, comes back to that narrative, Jeff, of this is super complex stuff. The way that I try and help people to think about it is you have almost like this anatomy or a set of pillars to it, which starts with your go-to-market, starts with your operating model. So who do you serve? How do you deliver value to them? How do you meet customers where they are in terms of their maturity? You've then got underneath that is like the framework. It is the framework for delivery. So that includes project plan, but it includes everything else around that. So the methodology, the pricing, the packaging. Then you've got people pillar, which would be your resourcing, your talent management, your career pathing. Again, you're running potentially as you scale and grow and you go from being 10 million to being 50 million to being 100 million. Suddenly this team is 50 people, 100 people.
Yeah, with a lot of subject matter expertise that probably isn't all around the organization as well, too. I love the fact you brought up career paths because I immediately saw all the ones that we had to draw out. I feel that it's had the most importance when I was running professional services. What does that path look like? Oh, you could start here, but you could go over here. You could go wind up, you could start in support. You could start as a BA. You could go be a PM. You could be an architect. You could do all these different things.
100%. And then you've got like a link to that. Then you've got incentives. You have got development plans because you've got this continuous deal flow, which is projects, your backlog.
Yep.
Again, very similar to sales. The project is like the deal cycle. So it's a very similar world.
Clarifying question on that.
Yeah.
In this world that you're talking about, is services absolutely needed? Or could the customer take it on themselves and you're just saying, hey, you could do this all yourself, but we're the best at this. So we can get this live for you faster. We've got the confidence. We've got the team.
The biggest trend has been companies trying to build applications and platforms that are super, super easy to use and very turnkey.
Yep.
switching it on. And even in those organizations where it is more of a switch on, let's say, and more of an activation than it is deep, heavy configuration customization, you nearly always need an overlay. I've never seen anyone who's made it like self-service motion.
Most likely in B2B enterprise software. When suddenly you're dealing with dirty data, authorizations, I'm sure you've got a long list of factors that could contribute to why you need experts instead of just saying, here, our doc is over here.
I definitely seen vendors, and we bought from some of them, where we've done it ourselves internally. Usually there's an element of guidance to that, which can be CS led. That's when you won't necessarily have an implementation team. But as you say, as soon as you move up market into bigger deployments of that very same software, those companies have got an implementations group. This is the thing, is you'll find companies where they'll have within that same business, that same product or proposition, they'll have a segment of customers where they are switching it on, or it is a self-implementation led by the customer, but it's a handful of users. Versus that very same solution being deployed across hundreds or thousands of users. And there is absolutely always usually an implementation of that. Just put simply because you've got to coordinate things like user activation, user training, all of those types of things, whether that's led by the vendor or the customer, or there's a hybrid approach. I definitely think that as you move up market, you're going to have some form of implementations. I've never seen it not there.
So we snap the chalk line somewhere between implementation and professional services?
So usually the evolution is, usually, this is this is just what I see. So usually the company will start, and again, same as with us, it's CS led to begin with. So it's led by the CSM. Then what I usually see is they then create an onboarding team. And the team might be called onboarding. And then there's a team of specialists within there, or it's hybrid, like they do a bit of CS and a bit of onboarding. Again, nomenclature can vary, but then it sometimes often becomes implementation. And that implementation, again, I would say usually is not necessarily charged for, or that certainly isn't monetized. Can be. And then there are occasions where it isn't, but at the early stage, they call it implementation. Then they begin charging for it. And it's paid for implementations. And then at a certain point, often they will rename that department PS.
Absolutely. Just to make things easier, just configuration, implementation, customization is professional services. At least when I'm talking to boards that are liking professional services, we certainly bump into them when they're smaller in the maturity model. No, like you said, everything's got to be easy and everything. I'm like, okay, let's call it, go in, configuration. You've got a standard set of parameters, get some requirements, set it up, versus this is going to be a really long project where we have to go in and scope, do some estimations. I find that's where I like to draw the differentiation.
Delineating between the two is really important. So as you say, if you conflate those two and you don't distinguish between them, or you don't understand them, and when they're happening, then you get yourself into trouble. And going back to your question about, have you seen people where it can be just this very quick switch it on? The North Star is you want the implementation and the sequence of things that happen to be very consistent. Packageable, very like just a consistent experience. And then understanding how much of the time do we need to do something custom, and being really clear about, like, firstly, understanding how often is that actually happening or not, and not kidding yourself about the fact that actually all of our delivery is standardized and it's really not.
Just once in a while, you won't be hiring like developers for your implementation team. It'll be NRE, and it'll be the product team maybe, because you don't have the facility, or you might bring in a partner to go build something special because, like you said, how often, right?
So that's an interesting one that you've raised. So I do also see, we were talking about some of the team, I also see models where you've got a sort of a PM community and then a bunch of developers, and that's delivery. It's PM and then custom dev, and it's usually absolute chaos.
And I've inherited many of those, and you build up better structures around them. But it's, again, like you say, it brings it back to what you're saying with the project plan versus a methodology. I see the same sort of thing. Oh, we have some devs and we have some PMs, or In the beginning, they have devs that are doing the own PMing, which is just terrible as well too.
The thing, so again, going to your point around like the role of the investment community in this, again, that's really important to like, if you're running a business or you're running a services organization or an implementation organization, or you're the CRO or you're the COO and this is under you, one of the things that I advocate is that you really want to get alignment with your board and all of the investors about what the role of implementations or services is.
Yep.
So are we an ARR enabler? Are we delivering positive margins? Are we selling services with this attach rate? Or is it all of the above? So do we need to actually be per your story where, we're telling everyone it's going to be profitable now? That's a very common sand shifting beneath your feet moment, which is you go from you can lose money to now you got to deliver me.
Start off as in just get customers live and 100% referenceable. Do whatever you got to do. Yeah. Maybe you guys could lose a little less money as the sort of the next stage. Yeah. And then it's suddenly like you're adding into the P&L and you're adding money back into the P&L. And that's, you want to be a profitable group.
Yeah. And that's something that we see all the time. It's services necessary evil. It's all very technically focused about implementation. Then there comes this level of awareness where actually this is a differentiator. Implementation experience is a differentiator. The referenceable customers is really important. Actually, we do care about, could this be monetized and would that cash be able to fund investments in our business?
Yeah.
Right. So like you going back to like career pathing, training, like it's difficult to fund all of these things if you're not generating money from services because you're going to have to get it from somewhere.
Something just popped into my head. I apologize because we had how we were going to go through today.
As always.
But I've found this, one of the other reasons I like to delineate between implementation and services, especially when we're talking about these boards, they don't like the complicating factor. They don't like the look that it's complicated to do. I found also in when you're selling as salespeople, there's a language of professional services that I try to avoid to reduce the appearance of this is really hard. So if you're going in and you're like, our stuff's 20,000 a year, it's 20 to 50 in that sort of range. And maybe we have a flat fee of $5,000 for implementation. When you start bringing in services words like statement of work, just even saying professional services, people just, they see, from my experience, love to hear yours, they remember that bad project. They remember where a big four came in and did $1 million scoping and that thing went 6 ways, sideways. That's a little bit why I wait till you're a little bit further along. And Insight Partners, by the way, is a great graph on this where it starts off as implementation and then you hit this revenue bucket and then suddenly it's services.
I hear this all the time. So I talk to services leaders a lot, and the persistent narrative amongst that community is we really struggle with getting our salespeople to sell services, either correctly or properly. And I was talking to someone about this at a conference in Florida a few weeks ago where they were, I really feel like the sales team is not really able to position services very well. And I was like, tell me like why?
It's just team. They have to make it easy to position. So, but
they can't really, going back to our discovery piece, they're not really very good at identifying really the pain and the challenges and the impact of those challenges. And therefore they're not able to position services. And I'm like, that's not a positioning services problem. That is a broader sales enablement issue.
Outcomes versus feature selling things for,
right? So to your point, if you're selling a product that's $20,000 with a $5,000 implementation, there might be less scrutiny on the implementation. The minute you get to being $20,000 fee, $30,000 fee, 40, 50, there's a lot of scrutiny on it. These days, most of the companies that we deal with in mid-market, I would say as soon as you get to $80,000 to $100,000, it's going up to the CEO.
Yep. Wow.
Every single time. It's certainly going to the CFO every single time.
Oh, yeah.
So therefore, like the cost of services, again, if that's positioned internally as, oh, hey, it would be nice for us to have this feature for XYZ, I would venture that deal is not getting signed off regardless of how much your services fee is. Whereas if it's, look, this is the outcome that we're looking to achieve as a business, and here is the financial impact of achieving that outcome, and it's going to cost us 50K in software and 50K in services, that's signed off. I think the services issue is less of a services issue. It's more of a sales capability issue. If we haven't really nailed the problem and the pain that the customer's wanting to solve, the financial impact of solving that problem, then I don't really care about your implementation anyway, to be honest. I'm not really listening. Like asking that question for whatever reason, just to give you the time of day as a salesperson. Whereas if I'm really keen about solving this problem, I'm super interested in what happens post-sale.
Yeah.
You'd be like, how can we prepare? We had this with a client recently where they were so prepared, and the solution architect said to me, they were like, that's the best prepared customer we've ever had.
Absolutely. And some people don't like it when they get peppered with all the questions. I'm sure you've seen this. Well prepared customers are the better ones. The ones who you're like, wow, that was super easy. They didn't ask a question. I'm like, no, that is not good. That is going to drag on forever because everything's going to be a big surprise, or they're not going to be invested in the project. They don't show up as well.
Here's a question back to you then, man. In the companies that you work with and advise, you're working a lot with the customer organization. So in the majority of the businesses that you deal with, how many of those do you come across where they go, we've got adoption issues?
I will say 90%, because sometimes they get brought into we just got some investment, we need to scale. What's the infrastructure needed to put into place? From some of the private equity companies that I work with, you get brought in when they've either smashed a bunch of companies together or they have an adoption issue.
Yeah.
And that's when we start pulling it back. And I look at what was said in pre-sales and how everything was positioned in pre-sales so that the implementation can go smoothly, getting the outcomes. And then sometimes you brought it up. A lot of these companies aren't selling on outcomes. They're selling on features. And and then I'm like, oh no, I'm going to have to turn, that's a longer fix. 90% usually have outcome or have adoption issues.
And then when you do the analysis, I would imagine that when you unpack it, a relatively large proportion of that is all linked to implementation, or maybe not implementation of product one, but maybe implementation of project 2 or 3, for example.
Absolutely. And for a variety of reasons, whether it be bad process or bad handoffs and transitions. But usually I do see junior teams that aren't well prepared. The worst thing you can do is have a CSM be a project manager because they're just so relationship based. They don't know how to use any of the basics of project management. And then the issues start compounding after that. The biggest thing I see is this subservience where they're so afraid of pushing the customer. And I'm always trying to do change management with them, which is saying it's okay to push them. You're pushing them to get their money's worth faster. And escalating is good because it shows, hey, you're paying for this. You're just not able to use it. Hopefully people are charging their MRR or ARR once the contract's sold. Now, if they're not, then it's a much, much bigger problem. What I see is a big bookings problem when they have said we're not invoicing until we're live. And then what is live?
So there's a few things there that are really interesting topics. One is this persistent issue, which is how do you make that more seamless transition from sales into delivery? A lot of that just starts with, are you well aligned with your teams internally? Do you talk? Do you actually have handover meetings, or is it in a doc?
That's exactly.
Or are you relying on sales?
Have 2 slides that go into the sales deck that make it really easy for them to talk to it. Don't overcomplicate it. And then be a good sales partner and get on these calls and listen and ask good questions. Those will make the deal happen faster. But don't just start freaking out during the call or after. We should not be signing this customer. When you're on the phone with the customer, like, that's interesting. Okay, great. We're going to talk about that internally, X, Y, and Z. And then you can do the whole like, hey, listen, this will be a good deal, but we need to do X, Y, and Z in order to get this. And then just be rational about it.
There's a few tactics. Like actually inserting a lead time is a good idea.
Yeah.
Like you really need to understand like how long does it actually take you to hand over sufficiently. Let's say you've got 1 meeting for a handover. Let's say that person leading the implementation ideally is reviewing a few of the call recordings with the customer.
Yep.
One of the things I advise people to do is you start naming all of your meetings in the sales process as certain things. So for example, we have things called process reviews, where we review the services delivery process for our clients. And we do that across a few different personas. That then is in our call recording solution, which means that then it pasted into the handover notes. So you have something called the first sales interaction, FSI. Then you have the process reviews but think about it. You might have maybe 3 hours worth of calls that would be useful to review before starting a project. That's
Yep.
a lot. There could be a half a day of effort in a more complex solution of handover. So again, we can't start next week if I'm busy next week and I won't have time to do that. So lead times is really important. To your point around decks, if you have a business case slide or you sell a proposition that's going to have a business case, that is like slide 1 in your kickoff deck. And it's not the smiley faces of all the team because they're already on the call.
Yeah.
Smiling. It's here's what you said. Has anything changed?
Yep.
Tell us more about this. Is this a good reflection?
Absolutely.
My wife is a HR director for an event company and they bought an HR solution. And I remember the onboarding call and we were working from home. And so the implementation and it was like, why have you bought from us? And I was like, wow, that is just,
exactly.
it just happens so often.
By the way, that's when my least favorite term in software gets said, which is, do you guys even talk to each other?
Have you actually talked to people? There's all of those things. There's also many people's CRMs, like the opportunities may not capture the information. So I always advise and counsel to try and have, whether it's medic or value selling or whatever it is, in the opportunity. So if you were to read the opportunity and people actually fill it out, it gives you a very good overview.
Well, I've got a couple standard plays when I'm fixing companies and people don't get their commissions until that stuff's all filled out. They can go hit closed one and get the deal signed and everything when the deal comes in the last day of the quarter. One of those things, as I said, sometimes I deal with more junior teams that don't understand the value of doing that. And CFO, everybody is in line with it. And it works because everybody's usually financially motivated. I'm curious if you're doing this. I really try and get one of our architects or somebody in the pre-sales process. Is like the contract gets sent out for the software. Okay, great. So you're not slowing that down. Lawyers are looking at stuff. Hey, let's talk about your implementation. It's forward selling a little bit. And then it's also finding out some of these things along the way and also helping prepare them, like giving them some homework to do while all the stuff is going on.
If you use a CRM and you track the time and duration within stages, like I know, for example, in my business, the average contracting time at the moment is about 45 days. Yeah. So to your point, within that 45 days, you can be doing stuff with the client, solution architect plugged in, CSM plugged in, get them into the LMS for your solution, product familiarization, a bunch of stuff like that.
Yeah.
Hitting on another one of your points, and this ties it back to the why from a financial perspective, is like, the way that businesses are valued usually is related to like your growth, your ARR, your gross retention, your net retention, and your profitability, but also your revenue. So not just your ARR, you can have your bookings, what you book.
You're talking about cash money is what you're talking about.
There's two elements. I'm talking about accounting revenue. Yeah. So recognized software revenue and recognized services revenue, which as to your point, is usually now increasingly linked to when the customer is getting that product. So that might be go live. It might be UAT of the platform switched on, depending on how you're adopting certain accounting rules in your business. It's regulated now increasingly. So telco tech is one of those ones where it's like at go live, when they make first call or whatever it is. When I really tuned into this, I was at Dreamforce.
Yep.
And I met the head of sales ops for a large publicly traded now, telecoms business.
Mm-hmm.
They had purchased a Salesforce vendor and I was doing a talk on onboarding and he said, look, I want you to meet the CEO. And so later that night, I went to this party that they were hosting, this fancy hotel kind of bullshit. Watching the head of sales ops said to the CEO, he said, that thing that we were talking about in the board meeting. And then in the investor call, this guy's got a business that can help us with that problem. And I was like, what happened in the analyst call? And what he told me was, and I've got the transcript, he said they had bought a business, they'd integrated it into their portfolio and they were reporting on the numbers. And they had booked 100 million in IRR, but only recognized 40 within that year. And in his words, the analysts had a field day. They were like, you're inefficient.
They've seen it before. Absolutely. I got those questions on analyst calls as well, too. That's what I mean when I said I need certain things. We need the power to be able to make sure these things, like, because we got caught up in Enron stuff as well, too. So you could milestone delivery. There was all sorts of new rules and regulations that by favorable pricing. It's brutal. Yeah.
And then the other thing is, final thought, right, is like, if you're looking to sell your business, when you get valued, you'll be thinking, oh, I'm going to get valued on ARR. So I'll get XYZ multiplier. No, you won't. Because where you think you're going to get valued, and then when you actually get valued, you'll get valued on, yes, on ARR partly, but on revenue, right?
Yeah.
So if there's, and I've seen in some businesses like millions and millions of dollars, like Delta, like you mentioned, like business $5 to $10 million business that only had 2 million in recognized revenue, and the rest of it was spread out over 2 years. And the investors pulling their hair out because they're like, we got to tighten this in. And again, comes back to implementations.
Yeah.
So it's this whole idea of this flywheel of growth, which I never really understood. Just fundamentally, sometimes the customer journey slide that everyone's got in their business that goes customer acquisition, onboarding, expansion, renewal. Quite one-dimensional.
Yeah.
It's quite one-dimensional because it's over 1 year time horizon.
Yeah.
The more I've thought about this is like that implementation block, per your point of, is it implementation? Is it PS? Is like one step in this choreography across multiple years. And actually, when you think about things over a 3-year time horizon, what is the operational run state that you want your clients in at that point in time?
Also very similar to the CAC sort of chart. Like when you're starting to get value, your acquisition costs for the customer are you're getting profitable off of that customer essentially.
More what I'm learning is if you try and bite off more than you can chew too quickly and try to cram too much into year one, people can't digest it.
Yes.
So you're going into the QBRs pushing this, and it's like, actually, that's where this sort of services portfolio and implementations and then PS or maybe some managed services and these types of things, as you get bigger, you need to have somewhat of a catalog to help get the client there over a period of time.
Absolutely.
And it's difficult to do that if you haven't monetized it to a certain extent.
Exactly. You said you had a couple of questions to ask me while we're still recording. Or are those non-recordable questions you wanted to ask me?
How tall are you?
I am almost 6'4". I'm not sure what that is in British measurements.
And did you play basketball as a young man?
Absolutely. And I now coach my daughter, who is 5'7" or 5'8" as a 12-year-old.
And what do they think of dad doing random videos in like hotel rooms on social media in like your white dressing gown, comparing? What do they think dad does for a living? I love it.
I mean, as you can imagine, they've probably picked up on my vibe by now. What they don't like it is when I take that same energy to the town Facebook group. Where because my daughters will send me screenshots and text of something that I've put onto the Facebook page, and they're like calling me a legend and all this other stuff. And they're just like, just absolutely dying. But I am quick with the comments on the Facebook group.
Ads should not be allowed on the internet.
No, I've been told to ramp it down a little bit. So it's very surgical strikes now.
No, I have a great deal of respect for you, Jeff, and your perspectives on things is really good, because I do think what you're trying to counsel in folks is to have a degree of economic competence.
Yes.
This isn't such a scary thing. And to just the post that you put out about if you charge X and you times that up over Y, it's not as scary as it seems. So hopefully today's conversation has helped a few people think through it.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. And thank you so much. I'm looking forward to chatting some more, because I really do enjoy our conversations and I learned a ton. Hopefully everybody listening will as well. This was very in depth and I loved it, and a fantastic conversation. So I'm really glad you jumped on here.